The Karate Kid franchise is, to me, probably among the most nostalgic franchises of all time. Whilst the original films came out long before I was born, I think, like many people of my generation, they still got trundled out by teachers when it was the last day of school, and they didn't want to bother having to do their jobs. Plus, I had them on VHS and watched them religiously, especially the first film, which is probably my favourite one. You just can't beat that heavy dose of nostalgia when you get Mr. Miyagi saying wax on, wax off, or when Daniel does the crane kick successfully for the first time. I think a lot of people were in that same boat, and so when the idea of a reboot Karate Kid came along with Jackie Chan and Jaden Smith, and instead of karate it was going to use kung fu and yet somehow retain the title Karate Kid, I had a reaction of visceral disgust. Pretty sure I never even gave it a chance and just wrote it off as absolute trash from the get-go. I didn't even bother to watch it. I was beginning my angsty teen phase back then, so I suppose that explains my overreaction. It took me years to even bother to watch it, and so I came into it looking for something to hate, but I really enjoyed it. If you can disconnect from your nostalgia for a minute, I think it's a lot of fun. And so since then, for reboots, remakes, and long-awaited sequels, I have always tried to keep an open mind. Hence why when I heard that they were making yet another Karate Kid, but this time infusing the two halves of the franchise together, I was actually rather optimistic about what it would look like. Yeah, there was a chance it would be god-awful and trample over my beautiful nostalgia, but also a really good chance it would be just what the doctor ordered. Before I went to see it, I of course took a look at what people's opinions were on the film. On Rotten Tomatoes, it has a critical approval rating of 58% off of 169 reviews, which didn't exactly fill me with a lot of hope for the quality of the movie. But of course, we realized long ago on this channel that critics often are going to be haters of family/action films, and so often the audience score is going to be a bit of a better guide for the movie's actual quality, even if they can often be a bit inflated themselves because they're filled up with extreme fanboys who refuse to admit anything's wrong with the movie. In terms of that audience score, it has a very high 92% approval off of about 2,500 reviews. Having seen the film, I will say this is probably a score that's a bit too high. I think that it deserves to sit somewhere in the middle of those two. Still, I'm not going to complain too hard that the fans really liked it. I'm not entirely sure whether it's been a financial success or not, to tell you the truth though. When it was released, it was projected to gross 25 to 30 million in the US and Canada on its opening weekend, and then it only grossed 21 million. So it came in under projections, but not by a whole lot. Since then, it's managed to gross 76 million off of $40 million, which I suppose isn't all that bad. It managed to make back its production budget and is slowly closing in on that break-even point if you use the old 2.5 times the budget rule. So I don't think the film's in dire straits or anything of the sort, but it probably doesn't help that it has an overlap in demographics with Lilo and Stitch, which only came out the week before and has grossed close to $800 billion. That movie's continuing to draw huge numbers through the power of nostalgia and family fun, and so actually I'm rather impressed that Karate Kid's even done half as well as it has now. Part of me thought it was going to end up being a massive flop simply due to the fact that it's a far more niche franchise fighting against the mouse. How'd you have a chance in hell against the mouse? Regardless, it's doing decently enough for what it is, even if it isn't hitting the same highs as some of the other installments in the franchise, specifically the 2010 Karate Kid, which grossed $359 million off of $40 million. Pretty big difference there. Regardless though, we're not here to talk about the money, or whether the critics liked it, or what the audience thought. We're here to talk about what I think of the film. So let's get cracking, shall we? Spoilers ahead if you haven't seen it, obviously. Karate Kid Legends follows the character of Li Fong, a young kung fu prodigy from Beijing who is the great-nephew of Mr. Han, the mentor character introduced in the 2010 adaptation. In the 15 years between installments, it seems that Mr. Han's risen rather high. Where once he was just a maintenance man, now he's a full-on shifu with a huge kung fu school in a really nice location. So I guess he's massively loaded now. Seeking to make a fresh start after the death of her eldest son, who was stabbed to death by a kung fu tournament opponent, Lee's mother moves the pair of them to New York City and away from everything he knows. He's banned from continuing to train in martial arts and feels very cut off and isolated until he meets Mia, his love interest and the daughter of Victor, a former boxer who runs a pizza place near his apartment. Sadly, this new love is somewhat tarnished by the fact that she has a crazy ex-boyfriend named Connor who physically confronts Lee on the subway, giving him a black eye. And then again at school where he easily defeats Lee, even as Lee tries to use his brother's special move, the Dragon Kick. Not long after this, Lee steps in to protect Victor from some thugs who have been sent by his loan shark, who happens to be Connor's karate teacher, to get what they're owed. Victor then decides that he has no choice but to return to boxing for one last big payday to try to save his pizzeria, which he would otherwise have to sell. After some encouragement from Mr. Han, Lee agrees to train him and gives him a kung fu crash course which allows Victor to compete with an opponent much younger and stronger than he is, until the opponent cheats and the referee proves to be less than useless, with Victor being sent to the hospital in critical condition. This sequence of events triggers Lee's PTSD from his brother's death, causing him to run away and briefly damaging his relationship with Mia, until Mr. Han arrives from China and takes him to the hospital, where a now recovered Victor absolves him of any blame in what happened. In order to help repay the debt though, Mr. Han convinces Lee that he should enter the 5 Boroughs karate tournament, which has a prize pool of 50 grand, which is easily enough to pay off the debt that Victor owes. The only problem is that in order to win, Lee needs to be able to defeat Connor, who has whooped him twice before. Thus, Mr. Han brings in Daniel LaRusso, the original Karate Kid, who agrees to help him due to the long history between the Miyagi and Han families. Together, they continue his instruction in both Kung Fu and Karate, with them even figuring out a counter to Connor's counter of the Dragon Kick. After working his way through the tournament, Lee finds himself facing down Connor in the finals, with his mother even coming down to watch the fight. Finally accepting his interest in martial arts, and realizing how it's helped him to move on from the murder of her eldest son. Long story short is that after a close fight, Lee gets his big victory. Connor dominates the fight early before Lee makes the comeback and then finishes him with the counter. The dude then tries to cheap shot him after the fight ends and gets humbled again, before Lee gets his prize money, a kiss, and all's well that ends well. Mr. Han goes back to China, the pizzeria opens a second location, and Daniel returns to LA and has a fun little scene with Johnny Lawrence to finish off the movie. Now, there's a lot to like about this movie. Is it perfect? No, but it's still far better than critics are giving it credit for. They're acting like it's a nostalgia fest that's utterly devoid of anything fresh or exciting. But for the most part, I disagree. After all, the film really centers almost entirely around the character of Lee. Daniel doesn't enter things until surely over halfway through the movie. And Mr. Han was only there for a little bit beforehand too. Hell, the bulk of the early story is simply Lee and his budding romance with Mia, his rivalry with Connor, and him training Victor, which was a fresh and interesting role reversal when normally the mentorship would be the other way round. In that regard, I felt that the movie blazed its own trail and did a lot of things differently. I have to say the actor for Lee, he was really good. I thought his performance was very fun and compelling, and he was a really likable protagonist who was written to be very believable, especially in the end when he overcomes the odds and defeats Connor, but he's not being hampered by injury. He still has to struggle to win, and that's what I like. They didn't have to nerf the villain or make Lee seem like he's an absurd savant. Instead, he has believable growth over the course of the movie and has to fight hard to win in a fair contest. I enjoyed that change from the norm. Really, I enjoyed the way a lot of the characters were written. Mia was a very wholesome love interest who had a lot of chemistry with Lee, and Victor and Lee had a very cute bond when they were training together. Then there's Alan, he's just a friend character, and usually that type of character is going to briefly appear in a couple of scenes, then fade away completely into the background. Here though, they were able to keep him relevant, keep him around in a lot of different scenes, and it just made the world and story feel more alive. For me though, one of the writing's biggest triumphs was in the characterization of the mum. It would have been so easy to force this character to be a nasty, yelling shrew who wants her son to focus on his studies and not bother with martial arts. A person who considers them an unnecessary distraction, and that it's her way or the highway. Instead, they gave her a very compelling reason to be an obstacle to his training. The traumatic murder of her eldest son by a vengeful rival from a kung fu tournament. This, combined with Lee's PTSD from that event, which crops up a number of times throughout the movie, was actually really compelling and beautiful, seeing them both work through their own pain and come to a greater understanding as a family. Speaking of family, Mr. Han was also great here. They showcased clear progression in his characterization, and the writing made it clear how he's influenced Lee in terms of his personality and the way he thinks about things, which isn't always an easy thing to do. Plus, when he finally arrives in America, he brings a lot of humor and heart to the movie, which was something that was needed. It does hurt my soul to see him looking so much older though. I know it's been 15 years and there's a big difference between mid-50s and early 70s, but my god, it is crazy to see how time marches on. Gave me a dragon kick right to the childhood, and I still haven't recovered. However, that doesn't mean I think everything was handled perfectly throughout the movie. I think it really struggled with its antagonists. Because they had to spend so much time on introducing fresh characters and reintroducing the older ones as well, I felt like in turn, there was way less room for the villains to have their time to shine. They've always been a huge part of each film in the franchise. Both in the age-appropriate rival, but then also the truly terrible mentor for that character, who serves as a foil to the Karate Kid's mentor. Here, that mentor sort of existed, but he was almost always in the background. He never even really interacts with either Han or Daniel in any meaningful way, and despite Victor owing him money, they never flesh out that side of things at all. I mean, I suppose you don't need to have that side of the story in every film, but seeing the reason why the villain is the way they are, especially since Mia openly says that Connor's only this aggressive and nasty because of his training at that specific dojo, it would have been nice. Instead, we're just told this guy sucks, but we don't get much of it at all. Same with Connor. The rivalry he has with Lee doesn't hit the same as Daniel or any of his villains, or Dre and his guy either. He just felt pretty bland and lacking in a lot of intensity, which obviously isn't what you want when you have your confrontation, which forms the final climax of the film. I hate to say it, but I also don't think that Daniel was well used either. He comes in way later to the story with no real connection to any of the other characters, and part of me thinks that the story should have been that the family's moving to LA, and so you combine the story role of Victor and Daniel into one character. I'm not saying that Daniel should be in trouble with loan sharks, but you can combine his role as karate teacher with one of being that heartfelt mentor figure too. It would have allowed that bond to form, and for it to feel like the two branches, one tree philosophy the film kept spouting about. In the end, I just don't think it worked, even for nostalgia reasons, and it was just a bit strange. On top of that, I felt like his acting was off. I don't know, I just wasn't getting much from him. But then when Johnny appeared, he was just electric. I was a little bit disappointed, I suppose. In the end, though, whilst that was a letdown, the story and the character development was still really good. And my god, the action was incredible. I felt like they upped the ante a whole lot here and made it way more fantastical, especially in the alleyway fight against the thugs. But you know what? I loved it. This movie is absolutely better than the critics say, and I hope it continues to somewhat hold steady and make enough money to justify a sequel, as I think they can do more with this revamped world. With all that being said though, these have just been my opinions, and now I'd like to hear yours. What do you think of Karate Kid Legends if you've seen it? Did you like it? Hate it? If not, would you consider going to see it? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know.